Welcome to Scene, where the art world meets the real world. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with emerging and established artists to offer a genuine glimpse into their lives and minds, all in an authentic and totally straightforward manner. I'm Carrie Scott, your host. And with 2 decades of experience as a curator and art historian, I firmly believe in the transformative power of art, if it's seen. Berto Herrera's work, it might not be overtly political, and it might not be totally autobiographical, but we talk about both those things in our interview. And I think that's because he's constantly trying to raise awareness around things that matter to him, but also that should matter to all of us. Issues around surveillance and racism and military force. These are big things, and he puts them in his work so vividly, but he does it under the veil of beauty. And so this work is like, it hits you. You look at it once, and then you start to unpack it, and it's big. I mean, his What Is Home series, that captures trees across America and Germany with this full spectrum infrared camera. And his aim was to raise awareness around the way that developers in American neighborhoods in the 1930s purposefully omitted trees from their neighborhood planning or took them down to make these communities less hospitable, to remove the ability for communities to build community. If there's nowhere to congregate because it's too hot, where do you go? Like I said, it's big issues that he's addressing, and he can because he's moved all over America. He's moved all over the world. And so he's got this unique perspective about culture. He's also, ex-military. And so he comes from a place of real knowledge. He understands the way these systems work from the inside. This work is important. It's also really good. Check out our interview. Okay, we've been trying to make this interview happen for a really long time. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or an absolutely terrible thing that we're doing it now. Because the first time we ever spoke was at the height of lockdown. And we were introduced by Nicholas Fahey. Thank you for that, Nicholas Fahey. And I kind of didn't know what to expect, but George Floyd had just been murdered. And I ended up bursting into tears on a Zoom with you. Basically, I think I was staring out the way. I can remember it. Got off the phone with you. I cried again. And I've just had this fucking shitty 2 weeks of 3 weeks, lost 2 people. And so I was like, great. I'm going to fucking talk to Berto when my heart is pounding in my chest. And you're going to do the thing that you do so well, which is just, kick my ass. So great. Welcome to the Scene podcast with Berto Herrera, people. If y'all end up crying, it's not my fault. No, seriously, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Trying to keep cool right now just because it's so hot, heat wave down here. So, but in general, I'm fine.
Okay, and down here is where people don't know where you are.
In Nuremberg, Germany. So I'm in Bavaria. So kind of southern Germany, kind of dead center. Bavaria is the southern state, but I'm in the top of the southern state. So it puts me kind of in the middle of Germany.
Okay, and you're going to have to explain why on earth are you in Germany? Kind of nowhere.
Yeah. So I moved to Germany in 2015. Yeah, 2015 from Portland, Oregon. And I moved here originally for Adidas. So I was a designer at Adidas when we first started athletics, which is now called sportswear. I worked there in total between the 2 continents for 10 years. And so I just came here and during the height of lockdown and nonstop meetings and everything else, I quit and decided to work on art. which I've always done, but really just focus in on what I do.
But okay, and like back up, you just kind of threw that away, like, which I've always done. I mean, you've been an artist for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I started doing works, and my parents didn't really see the potential until later, but they wanted to cultivate it. So when I was a kid, I used to draw a lot. So I initially started off as a draftsman because I just like to doodle and draw. And even in church, I would draw, which I got in trouble for a lot. Um, and then with my, I remember what really triggered it and why I wanted to be an artist, and just continue, not necessarily artist, because I think that's such an abstract idea, especially so young. It's like, I just want to do this for the rest of my life, which was draw and just do things and make things with my hand. And so that moment was when my grandma, that isn't alive today on my dad's side, she was flying back home to New York City. And while we were waiting, this is when you can actually go to the terminals. This is pre 9/11, everything. You go to the terminals, hang out, all that stuff. And so I sat there and was drawing my grandma's plane in a realistic idea. And I was probably like 4 or 5 or something like that. And ever since then, I've just always wanted to work with my hands. There's easier ways to do that, ways to get more money easier, such as construction and stuff like that. But the blend of working with my hands and creative has always been a big intersection for me.
Which actually does make a lot of sense, and not something I'd really ever considered. But like, if I think about your collage works in particular, they're so right. Your hand is such a part of making those, and the paintings are too. And I guess like I came to your work via photography first, which is kind of an unusual way for people to come into it, right? Because you've got this graphic stuff that you've got going on, creative direction you've got going on, but the physicalness is actually right now really coming out in your work, right? With the paintings, with the installations, with the collages.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like I always have to work with my hands, even if it's within graphic design spaces. That, like in my past, is there needs to be a human intervention with the work, or else it looks too sterile. It looks too manufactured, and I think that's, for me, that's one of the core things that I try to fight with a lot of my work, is to make it not look like it's manufactured. And prior to when I was doing works in LA at the art collective I was a part of, a lot of my work was all about being manufactured and look really polished. And I painted an acrylic and I would sand acrylic down and then I'd reapply and sand it. So it has a super flat look to it to look like it was screen printed. But now I've kind of gone back to what I was thinking as like a kid, is how to just make something. And it doesn't have to be perfect, whatever that means. But how do I make something? So a lot of the collage pieces is, yeah, they look like perfect squares, but there's not a perfection to them because of the shifting of things, the way I make on some of them. Also to the newer part of the collage collections, which was all printed works. So I was in the dark lab and I used brushstrokes and spraying and different techniques to actually develop the photographic works as the background of those collages. And then working through, kind of how one would read it, such as one would read or look at how your windows are set up, such as like internet, right? Because we all have tons of amounts of windows. If you look at your phone and you look at how many windows you have open, it's probably a lot. I recently just killed a bunch of them. It was around 450. Now I have about 100 windows open. But in general, this is how we look at information and perceive information and digest information in the new digital age, because things are everywhere and we consume them all at once, which I find super fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and so much of your work is positioned around that. And I want to get into surveillance and tech and how you play into that. But we first have to do like a potted history of you. And I don't know how much, right? You and I have known each other now for 4 years.
So, yeah, 4 years.
So I know, I feel like I know a lot, but what I don't want to presume is that you want to tell the world a lot. So you've got to kind of run with it where you feel comfortable, like telling your kind of biography. I know a lot of it's out there for public consumption, but I kind of wanted you to do a this is how, yeah, and particularly, right, like, and I hope, again, I'm like, is he going to kick me? You can't kick me because you're in Berlin
No.
and I'm in London, but you'll see me soon and you can kick me. But like, I do want to talk about the army. I do want
Yeah.
to talk about, you've seen a lot of the world. You've seen a lot of America, a lot more of America than lots of people. Your kind of mobility, and this transient. I don't know. You're like a native to many places. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know these communities really well. So I just want you to, where have you been?
I've been a lot of places, and to go back to like a local to places, I go back to this piece of information that I got very long ago. I can't remember who told me. So I worked many jobs pre going into the military, after the military, but pre-military I was a bellman for a 4 or 5 star hotel, and I had to go pick someone up, and I think someone told me. This piece of information, they're like, if I can give you any advice in life, is it pays to be a local. And what that means is many different facets. But it's like, if you go to a bar or a restaurant and you revisit it, make sure you tip the local people. And because the U.S. is really big on tipping, make sure you tip the people well. So when you come back in, they know who you are and stuff like that. And it's just not about like a money exchange. But it's more about how you treat people and stuff like that. So I've always had that as a nucleus of anywhere I go is it pays to be a local. So going back from that nugget, I've lived pretty much visited about 40 something states. I've lived I was born in Albany, Georgia, which is middle of nowhere, Georgia. And then I was more or less raised in Texas, I'd say. But I've lived in Georgia, Detroit, New York City, Barstow, California, Okinawa, Japan, and then, Amarillo, Texas. And then throughout my military career, though short-lived, thank God, I was stationed in San Antonio for basic training and then went to technical school in Vandenberg, California, which is Central California. And then I was stationed in Cheyenne, Wyoming, FE Warren Air Force Base. And then I moved to, I did a tour in Kuwait, so Al Jaber Air Force Base. And that was specifically during the height of the tensions post 9/11. So there wasn't a war declared on Iraq specifically, but there was a war declared on Afghanistan. So there's a lot of tension, and Al Jaber was the first base. If Iraq invaded, it was the first base that they would hit before they got to General Republic of Kuwait. So sometimes you would see at night or at sunset, you would see the tanks and stuff of Iraqi soldiers lined up, waiting for the orders to invade. I remember walking around the base and seeing F-16s and A-10s with full payloads. And what a payload is all the bombs that they would use for military tactics and fighting, fly out with full payloads and land back in the evening or a few hours later with no payloads. So just knowing that they were bombing indiscriminately along the way to Afghanistan, the Iraqi people. So I mean, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot, been around the world a few times. And for me, throughout my travels, I think people are pretty much the same. They just want to be treated with respect and they want to share. I think that's the main thing. It's a lot of people want to share their culture and customs with you. Even if you're visiting America for the first time, you've never been, a lot of Americans will invite you in. It's like, oh, we do it like this, or this is our thing, this is that, and other. Same with Germany, same with a lot of different places that I lived. Is everyone really wants to show you how the culture is, and then with that and what you take from that is like, how do you see yourself and how do you fit within that culture?
Do you think that traveling, I mean, especially that much in the US, do you think that gives you a sort of an ability to criticize or critique or look more closely at kind of culture?
Yeah, I mean, when I was traveling around the U.S. around that time when I was a kid, U.S. is vastly different. The homogeny that's happening right now within the U.S. Wasn't really a thing. Well, wasn't too much of a thing. This was all before the internet too. So you had very distinct cultures between what was happening in California to what was happening in Texas to what was happening in the deep South, such as like Florida and Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and Arkansas and stuff like that. And those are all very distinct cultures with accents and everything else. And I think seeing that and then being able to see the homogeny that's happening, since I do and have traveled around the US a lot, not just lived around it, but also traveled around it for work, it gives you a sense of understanding local cultures, the disintegration of those local cultures, and then also being able to see from the larger picture and being able to articulate kind of what's happening within the scope of the American zeitgeist, if you will, or Americanisms.
Yeah. So I want to talk about two series, or I'd like to get into What is Home
Yeah.
and the forthcoming series all about American trees. And I don't know how to do it. I think they're really interconnected. So I just had a general let's talk about trees. But you do have this fascination with trees in the landscape. Why?
I think it goes back to what I saw as a kid. Like I used to read a lot of National Geographic and just being out in a lot of nature. I remember one of my early childhood homes, we lived behind a creek. Then behind the creek was just like full of forest and brushwood and stuff like that. So for me, nature throughout history, especially specifically American history, it was always meant to be tamed. You know, the whole manifest destiny and the Rough Riders and Teddy Roosevelt was to conquer nature and to handle it as man and how we kind of harvest that. And I don't think nature should be harvested or it can be harvested. I think it's going to do what it does, which is always take what has been placed by man and break it down. And so for me, like it was just from all that, like growing up and being around that, and then looking at kind of my military service and looking at, you know, different techniques of why things were. And I was always been fascinated with land survey photography because I find that super fascinating because it's meant to just show the land, right? And look for specific things, be it like water, be it this, that, and other, for better farming or what have you. So always been fascinated with land surveying photography. And because it's just a different form of like landscape photography. It's not really landscape photography. It's meant for a specific purpose, and not just a commercial purpose, but also a military purpose as well. So I was looking into like different aspects of what aerial photography was doing and what it was looking like. And specifically, I came across not World War II, the Vietnamese War, or the American War, as they say in Vietnam. And a technology that Kodak made was called aerochrome. So what it did was, it was an infrared film, and it was used specifically for aerial surveillance, aerial photography of forested areas, the jungle, and trying to identify where their enemy was. So everything that was of greenery with chlorophyll and everything else ended up being bright red or pink. And then everything that was man-made was just this natural color. So they were able to identify how to distinguish what was enemy territory or what was happening in the jungle if they were building something, this and the other. And then what I did was like, hey, like this thing's been rooted in military technology, surveillance, also has that aspect of like surveying land, because it's always like the idea of surveying land in general has always been exploitative for, you know, commercial needs or colonial powers, be it like even photography, even drawing, like even going back before the camera was a thing, like people drew the forests of where things were. So there's always been this aspect to it. So yeah, like I did the series around, mixing those two things and see how it comes out.
Well, and with those, what's kind of astonishing to me is, right, they read like really beautiful black and white photographs of the land, but in most instances, the perspective is destabilizing, like intentionally so, right? So you'll have it so you're looking up at a canopy, or that like a tree feels like it's looming against the viewer. But I love the tension between like they're beautiful, and so beauty is the bait, right? You look at them and you're like, oh, just beautiful photograph, and then you start to unpack the the concept and the method by which you took them. And like, let's not make any bones about this, that tech is used to find people, human life, and destroy it, right? So you're almost reclaiming this really horrible technology and saying that there's got to be a better use for it. Is that fair? Is that a fair like reading?
Yeah, I think most of technology that we have has been declassified military technology, and I think it's right for the public to reclaim, what was once used for military exploits or conquering. So using those things, even if you look at photography, it still has it originally had its roots in colonialism and documenting, if you will, the savages. And with that, it's like taking that and using that to my ability to not just reclaim, but use it as some type of justice or understanding of why things happen and where things happen. Because especially with photography, it's very rooted in time and place and space and environment. And I think when you start to remove those things, how I kind of look, like these trees could be anywhere. And once you start to remove that, it becomes a larger discussion for me. It's like, how does this fit within not just Germany, but how does this fit within the US? What does this mean? How does this mean in like places like South Africa and everything else? So I try to intentionally keep it abstract as to where you're situated. If you know like where the images were, like obviously, but removing certain aspects from it to where people could see themselves and where that image was taken. So removing environment, I think, is really important with my work.
Saying that though, not to disagree with you, you then have this other project that you're working on, which is looking at trees in major cities, and that justice piece is central to this project that I know is kind of still in development, but I'd love to talk about the idea that and I had no idea, like this was totally an education for me. I knew all about redlining in America. I had no idea that there was also a literal removal of trees in major cities. Can you just talk about that series and where you're taking that?
Yeah, I mean, it's also partial like going to America a lot, since redlining outside of the U.S. doesn't. I mean, it exists to some extent, but it's more difficult to find and more woven, while the U.S. is pretty clear. So in redlined areas, which are typically people of ethnic origin, to separate out those people from white people specifically, to maintain property values for their more or less investment. So looking at it always comes down to money, which is sad to say. And a lot of those places, what they wanted to do is also make it uncomfortable, also make living situations to where they could fit more people in. So with that, with fitting more people in, you remove a lot of the landscape, a lot of the trees and everything else. Along with that is the fallout of that. So especially in summers, which are really hot, such as like Atlanta, Southern Texas, even in like El Cajon and San Diego and stuff like that, where it gets really hot in certain places, the people with the most wealth, which typically were white people, due to redlining, those communities in those neighborhoods were naturally cooled because they already had all the trees that have been living for hundreds of years. and or new trees that they're planting so they grow up. And so those environments are already naturally cooler, more inviting. And also, like, a lot of these trees are meant as a place for community to happen, right? Like, people come together. There's a barbecue, this, that, and other. All these parks. So it's also meant to bring people together. In the impoverished or redlined areas is where they start to remove a lot of these trees, and so those areas are naturally hotter, and it makes it more unbearable for people to live. Also, with that, like, heat levels also intensify, people becoming more aggravated and everything else. So you have more crime and all these other things. It's just a snowball effect. Um, and so for me, like, looking at that and that work being about that, of showcasing that and looking at these trees and surveying the land, right? Because a lot of my work is around surveillance, and a lot of the images that I take are land surveillance, if you will. So taking that and being able to show that, and make people think about the work and make people think about how this is happening, how it still continues to happen. Not a lot of these places have yet to be replenished with trees. A lot of these communities are still suffering, especially if we're talking about global warming and everything else, like, and climate changes. Those places are just going to keep getting hotter. And we should do something about that. The government should do something about that. Will they? I don't think they will, but at least the question's out there.
I don't know why it surprises me, right? It's like, I feel like is it twice a year, 3 times a year? I'm like, oh, that's another completely messed up bit of history that no one ever taught, right? And I had this the other day. A photographer, he is a architectural draftsman, for lack of a better word, but his father and mother documented San Francisco. I mean, literally destroying entire beautiful, amazing neighborhood, like the proper San Francisco, Victorian, like Full House nonsense. The beginning at Full House, that shot, like the most beautiful houses that were just being ripped apart by developers, and it was all communities that were deemed like minority, lesser than. I mean, literally houses. And in these pictures, I should show you these pictures. They're like, the houses are bisected, and you see they're like gorgeous. And the government was saying, oh, no, they're all dilapidated and disgusting, and like they need to go. And you're just like, how I don't know. I'm still in a, like, how the fuck did that go on? And how does it still go on? And how are we not trying to fix it? I don't know.
I mean, it's all hidden underneath the concept of progress. I think progression is a catch-all, regardless of the intent, because there's also other intents with the idea of progress, specifically within corporations and governments and nation states. So when you look at progress, and it's the same thing that happens here in Germany, the removal of identity, of what happened, the atrocities that happened during World War II, laid waste to German culture to some respect, or to feel shame. And I get why that was implemented. But once you start to remove the people from the land, culture from the land, and replace like old buildings with new buildings and stuff like that, to where it's this kind of cookie cutter, you lose the culture, and you displace not just the culture, but you lose a sense of identity. And so people in those areas start to revolt.
Do you think, and this is a question I ask myself about you, and I can answer the question too after you answer it, but like, do you think that you're a political artist?
I don't think so. I think my work can be skewed that way. For me, I think it's things that I'm fascinated by, or that I could talk about intimately, that I've personally gone through, or know that, lack of a better term, it's fucked up. It's like, okay, like, let's look at this, and what does that mean? How's that been viewed or documented or talked about? And a lot of the time, those works can be viewed as political, but I try to escape that political narrative just through the use of aesthetics, seeing something beautiful or seeing something laid out that's aesthetically pleasing. So it invites you in versus I find a lot of political art is meant to hit you over the head. And I hate being sold to. That's one of the things I have a lot of trouble with a lot of different movies, a lot of different works is if it's too heavy handed one thing, it can only be that one thing. And I think you should leave things open to interpretation, how people feel. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel at that time? How does it make you feel later?
Mm.
And then how does the person feel if they even buy works? Like how do they feel interacting with it throughout time? And I think that's for me that's super important.
I mean, the irony is surely not lost on our listeners or me or you. Just that, like, you spent 10 years working for a giant brand, using your creativity to sell that brand, and so with your work, that's like the last thing on the agenda. And I'll like circle back to the comment I made really quickly that was like beauty is the bait, but I think that's true of your work, is that it's gorgeous, and then you start looking at it and you're like, oh fuck, my heart hurts. Like this is hard, and that's especially true of the collages, which you've just shown in LA for the first time.
Yep.
Talk about how those came about.
Um, how did those come about? Okay. So they initially came about not through necessity or discovery, but initially it started off as a piece of client work, which funnily enough, so it was for this artist named John Millie, and he was recently signed at that time to, I think, Kanye's management team or some shit like that. I don't know. And so he was releasing an album, and a lot of his work deals around, like, one of the songs is like, "There's a War Outside," and it just fit within this like military-esque scope that I believe in and that I like. And so I created this piece entitled Number One to be his debut album. They went a different way, so it's kind of whatever's. And then I looked at it and I was like, you know what? I kind of really like this. I like what it's saying. It feels very much like me. It holds multiple different interpretations to things. It can mean one thing, it can mean this thing, it can mean so many other things depending on the reader. Let's explore this territory. And so I made them intentionally to fit within, because usually when you do an album cover, a digital album cover, it's a 1080 by 1080 pixels. So I was like, you know what, let's make it around the vinyl size. So it's 11.5 inches, or no, 11.75 inches by 11.75 inches. So, which is fairly close to LP, like a vinyl record. So I made them at the intent of looking at pop culture in that sense of like vinyl records and how we ingest the music that we intake, the things that we see. The square format is also rooted in digital media and social media. So looking at all these different forms, it's like, okay, like I have all these books, I have all this like material that I've always researched that's just stockpiling because I'm a hoarder of research. And let's start putting stuff out and just kind of laying around and see how that looks. And so I started to explore these territories. I was like, you know what? Like, let's paint the background. Let's do this. Let's do that. And so I'm doing airbrushing and printing things out and intervening with like prints. So I had a bunch of prints from other works, but they fit within this work depending on how I cropped it. And I think the idea of the print is for me, it can be pretty boring in a certain sense. So it's like there needs to be a human intervention with it. So I was distressing Polaroids with like different sandpapers and different textures. So you have this buildup of a microcosm of a world, but when you pull out of that microcosm, it's part of a larger scope of work and a part of a larger world that you're living in.
And there's a lot of like autobiographical content in that, right? in
Yeah.
those works. So whether it's, I mean, there's some crazy images that are like, that look like you're driving a car and it's like a street camera CCTV footage of you driving a
Yeah.
car. Um, there's a lot of you in those works. Do you think they are autobiographical?
I mean, not necessarily. I think there's parts of me that live in it. I think there's parts of my work or I live in my work, and that's fine. And I think it should live that way, right? Because I think that every artist puts themselves into the work. So, to a certain respect, I don't believe it's autobiographical, but given what I believe in, given my eye and how I did things, I do live in it. Yeah, and yeah, getting traffic tickets and stuff. I had a whole bunch of those. That was always fun to like rip those things out and put them into the works, and had these things kind of peppered throughout of like my story, which my story and how I live and how I view the world and the things I talk about. Many people can relate to in the sense of like surveillance and being looked at and persecuted against for certain different things. So yeah.
I am having a giant debate with myself about whether all art is actually autobiographical, that like it's impossible to separate the artist from the art. Which
Yeah.
I know it's like, I've gone back to grad school in my head and I'm like, I think we had this debate. I remember it. But I think I'm like changing my view slightly. Okay. And what's next? Like, what are the things that you're kind of burning to do? There's a lot going on, right? Like, you just did
Yeah.
this like immersive epic. I don't even know how to describe that installation, digital installation. Um, but what's next for you?
I think it was after, I've just kind of sat back and looked at my work and realized that it was around military and surveillance and systems of power that I wiped my full Insta. It's like, okay, like let's wipe it. Like all the stuff other stuff doesn't matter. And let's go after this. And a lot of the stuff that you saw on my Insta was like a laying foundation of things that my work's about. And with that, I'm just going to keep pushing with kind of this vein that I'm in and exploring the territory, because I think a lot of people look at surveillance and they think CCTVs, footage, this and other. I think that was just a tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much broader territory to discover and uncover with this work. And for me, I'm just going to keep pushing with it. Like I have some new works I'll probably shoot. There'll be more self-portraits because I'm really vibing with self-portraits. And I used to not like them, but just going back to it, it's like, okay, like I could really get with this. And I've tried to work with models, and a lot of model agencies just like they won't even listen to my crazy ideas. So it's like, you know what, I'll just do it myself. I do kind of like what Cindy Sherman did. It's like, no one wants to listen to you, do it yourself. So that's kind of what I'm doing. So there'll be a
They're
new.
not, hang on. We gotta
Yeah.
talk about these portraits before you go anywhere. They're not self-portraits in any way, shape, or form that are kind of traditional, right? And you are
No.
in every single one obscured.
Yeah.
Why?
So why? I mean, it goes back to like my former career in military, and being around military sex my whole life, coming from like a military family, traveling the world every 2 years or moving to a different spot every 2 years type of thing. Remembering my dad, like I remember him ironing his blues. Like I forgot what the military dress is, but in the Air Force, when I was in the Air Force, we called them blues. It was like fancy dress. I remember him like putting in his like military regalia, his medals, and stuff like that. And so all these things I think are a part of my visual aesthetic, be it commercial, like my commercial works, what I've done for Adidas and stuff like that, all the way to my personal works and my artworks and stuff like that. So I think they're all live within a certain distinctive aesthetic value. And yeah, for me, it's like I've always been down with just how a ghillie suit looks. I've always liked the way they look. They're used specifically for snipers to hide themselves in different areas, be it wooded areas, desert, And so it's like super fabricy and you kind of just like blend into the background. And so I really wanted to go like wear one and see what it, what it could do. Like, how does that make me feel? What can I even like perform in it? Because I think a lot of the ideas that we hold within military society and everything else, and how we view it, it's very much a performance. It's very much a performance of how we interpret it and what they share, because it's all propaganda to a certain extent. It's like they only share this piece, which is a performance of a piece of propaganda. So how I look at it is looking at how military propaganda has been shot and then kind of flipping that on its head. So yeah, I wore the ghillie suit. I had like the reflective balaclava, which is also used in like typically in raids. So you would have like elite teams like SEAL Team 6, like the Navy SEALs, Marines reconnaissance force, stuff like that. They would use balaclavas at night as they invade and take out certain targets.
But given you didn't want to join the military, right? You didn't.
Not necessarily, no. Yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. It's like I didn't really know what to do with my life. I was out of high school. I was thinking about going to college. Didn't really know. And my dad was a former Marine recruiter. He's like, how about you go into the Air Force? It's kind of the easiest to do. So I went to the recruiter, took the ASVAB, which is like the entrance test to see what you qualify for job-wise, and scored pretty high. So I picked the occupation of, ICBM technician. So ICBMs are intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are for short nuclear weapons. And so I did that occupation for a while, and I did it to travel the world. I didn't travel the world like I thought I would, but I think it was, in short, a good understanding of humanity, my life within it, my position within it, within, the beast, if you will. And also made me realize further that maybe art in college and all that stuff was probably the right thing to do. And so after I went into college. Yeah.
Okay, so back to the portraits. How do you feel when you're like, they're kind of performances? I see them as they're performances that then you document for us. Like, they seem really performative. You're draped over a rock and your form is totally obscured, or like when you've got the balaclava on, you are not a terrifying person. You are the opposite of terrifying. That photo is terrifying. How do you feel when you're doing it?
For me, I look at the concept of military very much as propaganda. And so it can be this terrifying looming force, be it in your face or be it abstract, that is always around us, be it the military proper or police forces that are militarized, specifically within the US. And I wanted to feel intimidating when you look at the images and how you feel about the images. Like there's a certain disgust in them when you sit with them. And I usually print at scale, so about A0, and it's large and it's in medium format, and you see all the details. And so you're sitting there with these works that you have to try to understand or be forced to understand. And it's hard to remove yourself away. When I was during the LA solo exhibition, I saw a lot of people just at those images, and you just had to stay with them. There's something about them where it was hard to remove yourself from them, especially since they had bullet holes. They were riddled with bullet holes. So that was obviously something else.
That's the story of all your work. That is the genius of it. Is a simple photograph of a tree becomes this like meditation on something so much bigger, and I think transcends kind of culture and perspective. And it is the thing that you do so well. Listen, we're over time, and I'm rambling, which is never a good thing. Before you go, you have got to answer one last question, which is, if you had unlimited budget and like the ability to go into any museum in the world, and you could buy one work, only one work, try to make it only one work, what would you buy and why?
Yeah, that's a tough
It can also be
question.
contemporary artist. Doesn't need to be
Okay.
historical.
Okay. So I would get a piece of Dan Flavin's work. Um, so Monuments of Tatlin, so done around 1964. For me, Dan Flavin, I was drawn to early on in my career of just creative, like after military. I'm talking after military. I'd say that's when my career and want to be an artist actually came from, is post-military. And then reading up on Dan Flavin while I was taking classes and everything else, and knowing him being a military veteran. Also, the fact that he didn't have traditional spoon-fed for being a fine artist. He didn't, do the typical thing. You went to the school, you go to this school, you get the MFA from this prestigious Ivy League college, and then, you get your solo show, and next thing you know, you're a Guggenheim. He didn't do that. So he actually worked in Guggenheim, MoMA, worked in security, worked as a mail sorter, and he was just a normal person that was a veteran. And he had a love for electrical engineering, which is my degree, electrical engineering, and he played with lighting. And for me, I think that's why I love playing with lighting so much within my work and photography and stuff like that. Like I showed you the setup that I have. It's crazy.
Yeah. Please note, Berto is lit perfectly. I said to him when we started the call, I was like, you're going to have to come and show me how to do this in here.
So I think it goes, for me, a lot of my love for light and use of color, because I predominantly wear black. So you can see some paintings that I'm working on, those successful or not, they're really very much about color and the vibrancy of color. And I think that all harkens back to Dan Flavin.
I love that answer. And you're also the first person to say him. So, yay, Dan Flavin. Listen, Berto Herrera, thank you so much. You are the best. I'm so glad I didn't burst into tears. Almost did. But thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Scene Podcast. If you liked what you heard, I'd love it if you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to connect with us between episodes, follow us on Instagram @WatchSceneArt. I'm Carrie Scott, and I'll see you next time. Get it?